Alpina came to my notice when, as a serial consumer of cheap old BMWs in the late 80s and early 90s, they were seemingly a cheaper, quirkier alternative to an M car. This is an Alpina B8. It's perhaps the pinnacle of this niche vehicle manufacturer's range. 201 miles an hour and luxury in everything you touch. See the logo? That's a pair of Weber carbs and a crank, reflecting the company's roots as a tuner. Here's a crash course in their history. The first proper Alpina was not the old Fiats and Beetles that founder Burkhardt tinkered with in his youth, but the A1 based on the BMW E21. Then of course they inevitably went racing, 24 hours at the Ring, Spa, the GT3 class and elsewhere. But around 2013 they turned further away from being an outright race manufacturer towards focusing on their bespoke luxury models. This is the first new Alpina I've ever driven. I'm quite fortunate to have driven a few of the older models back in the day when I picked up Alpinas as cheaper alternatives to equivalent M cars back in the day when perhaps not everybody appreciated or understood what they were. Back then they were perhaps perceived as being a tuning business and the focus was definitely on motorsport, whereas today of course they're a vehicle manufacturer in their own right. Each vehicle has its own unique chassis number and of course they're registered in Germany as a manufacturer. You probably know that. It's beautiful to be driving a new car. It's got that nice new smell. There's this Lavallina leather with a fat rim steering wheel and the two-tone stitching, which is absolutely beautiful. And it really does point you towards the detail that the factory has gone into in producing this. Now I say factory, clearly Alpina are hand in hand with their BMW friends, and it's no secret that of course the engine of this and the suspension and everything else is tuned by Alpina, but the basic ingredients come from BMW, and there's a kind of a complex arrangement where certain components are undertaken with R&D at Buchloe in Bavaria before being passed to the assembly line in Germany and Dingolfing and elsewhere for installation into the car. I think I should tell you how this car feels. Now I haven't driven the 850i on which this is based, but I can tell you that it does share that same rear wheel steer setup that this car has and the M8 does not have. Okay, it's probably lazy journalism to describe cars in numbers, but this has over 600 bhp, it's about £135,000 new, and will do 0 to 60 in about 3.3 seconds. Those are really impressive statistics from start to finish. I can also tell you, if you're a bit of a nerd, that this car in my ownership has actually had an average fuel consumption of about 27 miles to the gallon. That's metric gallon, not imperial gallon, which is really impressive for a big heavy car. And it just goes to show that the work that Alpina and BMW behind them of course have put into tuning these V8 charged engines, it's really impressive. So let's talk about the specific differences that Alpina have made to this car. There's a huge amount of difference. So the turbos are completely different to the original car, the inlet manifold's different, the exhaust is different, and then of course we get to the damping, suspension, wheels, front and rear bumper, and all those other little geeky details. That's pretty special. So whilst the changes to the cabin are fairly subtle, I would say, in terms of their difference between the standard BMW models, what lies under the skin is very different indeed. This is an extremely relaxed, composed car to push around, but it's not a sports car, and I like that. As we chuck this into a couple of corners here, you can really feel the weight into the corners. And this is 2,100 and something kilos. That's not one Lotus Elise or even two Lotus Elise, but that's 3 Lotus Elises. And of course we're not comparing like for like here, but it shows you that sports cars need to be way lighter than this. And I'm kind of glad that Alpina have stepped away from that now. There are enough sports cars in the world, and it's nice to have something that feels kind of special. It's always felt to me that Alpina is a bit of a geek's mark, and whilst I'm no expert in it, I've really enjoyed researching the history of the company and a lot of the models I'd never even heard of or aware existed. And this B8, this is really something quite special. like to talk about what I like and what I dislike about this vehicle, and I'm going to express that through the medium of coal mining and comedy. So we start with what I do like. Comedian Sean Locke once said it was pretty pointless, the International Olympic Committee trying to ban drug taking in athletes, because what everybody really wants to see is a load of drugged up athletes running the 100-metre sprint in 3 seconds, or maybe throwing a javelin for 400 kilometres or something crazy, all pumped up on drugs. And it was, you know, a lot funnier than I've made that sound. But that's how this car feels to me. This feels like they've taken an athlete and they've pumped it full of crazy drugs to just take it that step further. And it's like, how far can they take it? There's over 600 bhp, 600 odd newton meters of torque, and it's just ridiculous. It's like a weightlifter that can pick up a house and also run the 100-meter sprint in 3 seconds or something. I think that makes it a huge amount of fun, and it does make me wonder where Alpina will go in the future. Do they embrace the all-new electric future? What would they do with an i3, for example? Or do they go the other way? Do they embrace their diesel models? Because of course fewer diesels now are for sale, and it seems that there's less investment in diesels, but there's some tremendous diesel Alpinas out there, and I think that weirdly suits the image here as long distance grand cruisers where you're not having to stop to fill up every 2 minutes because you're guzzling through the fuel. Maybe that's me being an old man, but yes, Alpina is great. Give them more drugs and see what they do. Oh, this is nice. And on to the things that I like less. And I think it's worth pointing out that these are just general grumpy mustachioed old man grumps here. These are not specific faults or flaws of the vehicle, and I'm going to express this with the medium of coal mining. Coal miners suffer from an illness called white spot, and it comes from when you work with vibrating tools for so long. You get a numbness in your fingers, and it's a really debilitating ailment, and fortunately nowadays, of course, very few of us are coal mining anymore. But what happens is you get the shakes and you lose a sensation in your fingers. Now, why am I saying this about this vehicle? Because the steering's pretty good and the brakes are pretty good for a big heavy car. No, it comes from the electronic assist. So it has lane departure assist, and like most, if not nearly all new cars now, it'll give you a little shove when you're in the wrong lane. Now that's probably good tech, and it helps with insurance and it helps with safety, and hey, that's got to be a good thing. But in this car, this is so big. When you drive it on British roads, unless you're on a motorway or an A road, you absolutely feel the size of it. So unless you go poking around in the menu, the whole system is giving you white finger. It's kind of shaking away at the steering wheel because the car is so broad, it's actually kissing that centre line a lot of the time. Now you might like it, but I'm not so sure it's a good idea. Burkhardt built a business that the family can be proud of, and today the business is run by his sons Andreas and Florian. Alpina went from typewriters to whining porters to creating the electronic music band Kraftwerk. Well, they didn't, but they're so cool they probably could have done.